Now, as we've been talking about, as more countries in the region get pulled into this conflict, Saudi Arabia is hosting an Arab-Islamic summit to discuss the war in Gaza. Participants are calling for an immediate end to the fighting. So for more on this, we have reached Sajjan Gohel, International Security Director at the Asia Pacific Foundation. Sajjan, good to see you.
Good to talk to you, Natasha.
Sajjan, I'd like to begin by getting your assessment of the first bits of information we're getting from this summit of Arab and Islamic nations that are meeting to talk about this war. We know that they've demanded an immediate ceasefire. What are you taking away from these talks?
Well, it's an important gathering of various countries in the Middle East, as well as extends it to South Asia and North Africa as well, Natasha. So it is a big gathering. Its aim is to show that there is a unified opinion on the current crisis between Israel and Hamas. Whether that actually translates to any form of tangible pressure, we'll have to see. It may be not necessarily aimed just at Israel, but also at the West as well, especially the United States.
They've put out a communique from the summit, and in it, in part, it does not recognize the actions of the Israelis as actions of self-defense. They are accusing Israel of war crimes and, quote, barbaric and inhumane massacres by the occupation government. I mean, this does not sound like a summit where people are looking to meet on common ground. This is clearly a line that Israel would reject. How do you think the conversation will move forward?
Well, unfortunately, any forms of conciliatory language, efforts to de-escalate tensions, they're not going to be seen as forthcoming right now from what it seems any direction. So that is not necessarily surprising. I would say that it is important to remember, because it often gets lost in the cloud of war, as to what triggered the problem in the first place, which was the Hamas operation on October 7th, which was a very shocking attack in Israel, not just targeting Israel's military, but civilians and also people that weren't even from Israel. You had very poor farmers from Thailand, Nepal being killed in the Hamas assault as well. So it is important to remember what created the problem in the first place. The Israeli operation in Gaza has, of course, attracted a lot of attention, a lot of scrutiny, and the collateral damage has been significant. So that is perhaps what the statement is focusing on, but it's not going to contribute to resolving the situation anytime soon.
The Americans have also come out, and in fact, we've heard from Antony Blinken, Secretary of State, that too many Palestinians are dying, meaning too many Palestinian civilians are dying. But the Israelis have said again and again that they are not trying to hit civilians and that they're giving them opportunities to get out of the line of fire. It just seems that these two narratives are not coinciding. What is your sense of what's happening?
Well, the U.S. has tried to engage in dialogue with multiple actors, whether it's those in the Middle East. They've had some setbacks when you had people like King Abdullah of Jordan canceling a meeting with Biden when he visited the Middle East. You also had the meeting canceled with Mahmoud Abbas, the leader of the Fatah group. Then you have seen that Antony Blinken has been going back and forth, shuttle diplomacy, not just in the Middle East, but in Asia. You had the foreign ministers meeting, the G7 meeting in Japan recently. There is an effort by the U.S. to try and get some form of multilateralism involved here. But there is now a major fault line, Natasha, between how countries in the West see the situation and those in the Middle East as well. And then there are some that are calling for a ceasefire. President Macron of France has been one to advocate that position. But it's going to require a lot more sustained effort to try and get to that stage. At the best, one can hope for are these temporary pauses for humanitarian aid to come in, and that is very essential.
Now, you mentioned there the U.S.'s position in all of this. And to that point, the Americans are also being hit, both in Iraq and Syria, their various military bases. There's just so much to pull apart, Sajjan. The attacks on the military bases with the U.S., what's happening in the West Bank, Yemen getting involved in the conflict, and of course Hezbollah in Lebanon. Can we stick with the U.S. for a moment and talk about what's going on there with Syria?
So there is a lot going on, which you've identified, and we are seeing an escalation taking place of the conflict potentially spreading. The U.S. has various bases, for example, in Syria as well as in Iraq. They're coming under attack by Shia militia groups. These are entities that are believed to be sponsored and supported by Iran. We've seen in the case of what's happened in Yemen that the Houthi militia has claimed that they shot down a U.S. drone. And then, of course, Hezbollah in Lebanon has been using a lot of tough rhetoric to escalate tensions. And there have been skirmishes already with Hezbollah and Israel as well. So it's all spreading with things that are happening that we didn't want to happen, but perhaps were inevitable.
Something the Israeli defense minister said is getting a lot of attention. He's warning Hezbollah that if you continue your strikes, we will do to you what we're doing to Gaza. And how likely do you think that is? Are we on the verge of seeing this spread into Lebanon?
I don't think that we will see a second ground assault being conducted by Israel right now. They have committed a huge number of resources to Gaza, and they will stretch themselves then if they start another front. But what you may see is specific targeted airstrikes against Hezbollah installations in southern Lebanon, as is already taking place. It is not getting enough attention, but there have been those type of incidents.
Let me ask you about the West Bank, because so much of the focus has been on Gaza, but we're hearing continuously about increased levels of threats and violence taking place there. Is this now a two-front war on that end?
Well, the West Bank is obviously having a number of challenges because they are seeing what is unfolding in Gaza, and there is a natural reaction to that, what is happening with fellow Palestinians and the collateral damage that is being created. So there are those dynamics that come into play. Hopefully it doesn't escalate further in the West Bank, but there are those tensions and they're simmering. Those simmering tensions then have knock-on effects with the Palestinian diaspora in Jordan, for example, which is right next door. So one part of the Middle East that gets affected is having that knock-on effect in other parts as well. It's like a hand, Natasha, with multiple fingers that are interconnected. And if one finger feels that repercussion, it has a knock-on effect throughout all of those fingers.
Okay, we'll continue to watch and turn to you for your expertise. Sajjan Gohel, thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure, Natasha.